So if you're interested or invested in BMNR, you must be invested in ETH's future. So in today's video, I'm going to give you a short update on BMNR's holding. I'm also going to talk about where ETH is going and its wide, broad market adoption. And then finally, go over some concepts that I believe would help clarify and help myself and you understand what the value is behind ETH. So before we get started, my name is Colin. Welcome for those of you who are new. What I do is I do fundamental analysis on crypto and stock projects that I believe have long-term value. Now remember that the market is extremely volatile. You risk losing your money, so make sure you do your own due diligence and research before you get into anything. Furthermore, I have nothing to sell you. This is not a sponsored video, and yes, I do hold BMNR and I do hold a bag of ETH. So if you like what you hear, please give this video a like, consider subscribing, and for those of you who are on X, consider following me on X where I can tweet out this stuff a lot faster than I can make a video. So if that out of the way, let's get started. So first off, their holdings update. So on October 20th, they gave us this PR and updated what they were holding. So right now they hold 3.2 million ETH. They have 192 BTC, that hasn't changed yet, 119 million in terms of their orbs, their moonshot investment, 219 million of cash, giving them a treasury of $13.4 billion. And we just jump into our Excel right over here. You can see that's the number of ETH they have. And at the time of recording of this video, ETH is trading between 39 and 4,000. So I put it at 4,000 right now, gives them a $12.9 billion of ETH holdings. Their cash on hand, their BTC, and their orbs holding, giving them a NAV of $13.3 billion. If you estimate the shares outstanding, this is only a guess, an estimate, or a guesstimate. My best estimate is 335 million as of today. And if you do their NAV per share, it's roughly $40, and the market price is trading at $53. It could be up or down by the time I'm done recording this video, giving them a NAV of 1.33. So I just want you guys to remember this. Right now, the treasury is worth $13.3 billion with an MNAV of 1.3. They've been trading between 1.3, 1.5, showing that Tom and the team has been executing those ATMs really well. So just as the night was ending, Tom went out and he bought another bag of ETHs, about 63,000 ETH, $250 million worth of ETH. That's why a lot of people, including the investors and also the competitors, have a really hard time keeping up with BMNR. So I made a post right here illustrating the rapid speed that BMNR is buying ETH. Now, if a competitor wanted to come in, move in, and catch up to BMNR at the price of ETH of even $4,000, they would literally have to buy 31,700 ETH a day or 960,000 ETH a month. Translating that into dollars, it's $126 million a day or $3.8 billion in a month's time. So you could see BMNR is way ahead of all of their competitors. So if you take this daily rate, and if you look at their alchemy of 5%, Tom literally has until January, so January 2026, mid-January, before he actually ends up buying 6 million ETH, that 5% alchemy that he was always talking about. And at $7,000, at that time, ETH, that bag would be worth $42 billion. Those 6 million stack of ETH would be $42 billion. So you could see there's clearly nobody even in sight of BMNR. So I also get a lot of question about ETH staking. When is BMNR going to do it? So at token 2049, if you look at what Tom says here, he says that it's going to be starting very soon. So we should get some word about it, especially during the next earning call. And then he also talked about talking to some of the Ethereum founders, some of the devs, which I like to hear about, telling them that whatever upgrade is coming, make sure that it's compatible for Wall Street, because a lot of the Wall Street firms are choosing Ethereum and they're moving in there. So in order for BMNR to be successful, Ethereum has to thrive. If you remember back one cycle or two cycles ago, there was literally no talk of any major banks moving in. But now Ethereum, the major units of Ethereum that's growing is the stable coins are growing. Real world assets are coming to Ethereum. We talked about this for weeks. And then finally, in order for it to get adopted, it has to be adopted by the wide business community. So let's take a look at Ethereum and where it's going right now. So in order for Ethereum to be adopted as the world's finance operating system, it's got to go stepwise. We know that stablecoin has been growing, and this year has been huge for stablecoins as it's been moving in. Remember, the Genius Act was passed earlier this year during the summer when it was enacted into law. That really paved the way for stablecoins and for companies working with stablecoins in order for it to grow. So remember that stablecoins, we talked about a $300 billion stablecoin market right now, with Ethereum being at 60% of that market. And if you look at the daily growth of stablecoins, just on October 20th right now, notice Ethereum added $1 billion just that day over the last 24 hours compared to to all these other chains. So you could see that stablecoin has been growing rapidly. And we look at what the CEO of Tether, Paulo, said right over here. You could see that he says that USDT has now reached 500 million users worldwide. So following that successful first step, the next thing we saw was tokenized equities. And we know that Robinhood is doing it. They've now tokenized 500 equities on Arbitrum, which is a layer 2 on Ethereum. We could see this on chain right over here. So following this success, we'll see tokenized real world assets like real estate. We're talking about credits and everything else. If you look at the real world assets right now, it's reached $30 billion. And if you listen to Larry Fink right over here,
I do believe we're just at the beginning of the tokenization of all assets, from real estate to equities to bonds across the board.
You could see that the CEO of the world's largest asset management group of almost $14 trillion is talking about tokenizing all real-world assets that's going to be coming to a blockchain. If you rewind back 4 years ago, nobody was even talking about it. But now you have all of the major Wall Street financial firms moving in, and specifically BlackRock talking about tokenizing all real-world assets. You're going to see an explosion of this in the coming years. Now, one of the things that reminded me of Ethereum's stability and its robustness was the recent downwards of AWS. I'm sure that everybody has felt it because so many businesses were affected when AWS was down for 15 hours before they could restore it. That's one of the reasons why I think people are going to choose Ethereum, because for the last 10 years, Ethereum has never been down. So compare that to other blockchains, to other centralized businesses. And right over here, Benji puts it best. It says Ethereum, AWS is down. Most of the internet just went offline. The most centralized and efficient things go down all the time, but Ethereum carries on. An engineering masterpiece, a global movement, and a bastion of freedom all in one. So I think he capitalized this perfectly and described what Ethereum is. And that's why all of the Wall Street firms, all of the businesses and government entities, I think will be selecting Ethereum before any other blockchain. So talking about widespread adoption of Ethereum, you can see right over here, even big businesses like Shopify has adopted Ethereum. You can see that it's accepted USDC on Base. Base is a layer 2 on Ethereum with Shopify payments. You can see other places like Walmart. Walmart talked about accepting Ethereum and other crypto payments through their OnePay Cash right over here that was integrated through Coinbase, starting with Ethereum first. You look at other payment vendors like PayPal with 400 million users, you can see that they've already been accepting BTC ETH on their platform. And you can see right over here, VanEck, one of the largest asset management, has filed their S1 with the SEC so that they can hold their ETH ETF. So they would be the first proposed ETF to hold stake ETH. It shows really a lot of institutional demand for ETH coming from all directions. And the last thing I thought was really cool is right here with Bhutan. I know it's a really small country of 800,000 people, really peaceful and a nice place to visit. Right over here, they talked about their national digital identity system that's being built on ETH. And you can see Vitalik was here for the ceremony. So really cool that ETH is being adopted by a sovereign nation. So during the last portion of today, I just wanted to connect long-term value of a good asset with patience and looking at the numbers in order for it to guide you. Now, I'm a big fan of Warren Buffett. If you haven't noticed, I love this quote right over here where he says, "The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient." And that is not any more true in a case like BMNR and Ethereum. So I get a lot of questions online all the time, and I hope that I can answer some of them here. One of the things that people have to understand is the price of BMNR is dependent on the underlying, which is Ethereum. So if Ethereum fluctuates, which Bitcoin makes it fluctuate a lot when Bitcoin is up and down, so will BMNR, but BMNR is a leverage vehicle, so it's going to fluctuate even harder than ETH. Now, one of the questions that I get all the time is all of these purchases that BMNR is making, whether it's 250 million or 800 million, why does that not influence the spot price? Why doesn't ETH just shoot through the roof? And I get people who come at me all the time, sometimes in a genuine fashion, other times they're kind of just like trolling and wondering why. But let me explain it to you. If you haven't thought about it, this will clarify that point. So the reason why every time BMNR makes a big purchase, you see Tom executing those major 200, 700, 800 million, $1 billion purchase of Ethereum, it doesn't affect the spot price is because he goes through the OTC, so the over-the-counter trade desk in order to execute this. So if we just compare the two processes, here's the traditional way of trading. You as a buyer, you go to the exchange takes a look at the order books, matches the buyer and the seller, executes that transaction. In the OTC, it works a little bit different, whereas the buyer is a big institution, private wealth, somebody who has a lot of money, goes to a broker or an OTC desk. The OTC desk takes a look at their inventories, and then executes that transaction. So let me talk about why it doesn't affect the price. So when we talk about spot trading, we look at an order book. This is an order book right over here. Here are all the sellers, here are all the buyers. The exchange matches them up. So the major difference is in OTC trading, there's no direct order book interaction. What happens in spot trading is that a buyer comes in, continuously buys up all the orders and drives the price up, creating a slippage. Whereas in OTC trading, that is a single negotiated block deal with the trade desk. So what the trade desk does is that they look into their pocket, their deep liquidity. What I mean by that is they have a massive inventory, okay? You're talking billions in terms of ETH, BTC, or whatever else coin that you want. That's sourced from long-term holders like miners, validators, the whales, really wealthy individual, and they want to sell this steadily to avoid that major spot dump or that major spot pump. So really what happens in OTC is that it's a private negotiated deal. It never hits the public book. That's why you don't see that crazy spike in price, and it's true even if the deal is for a couple $100 million. But over time, the OTC desk can have an effect, a delayed effect on the supply of ETH. What I mean by that is if a bunch of institutions like BMNR calls up the OTC desk, continuously buys, $400 or $500 million worth of ETH or whatever coin it is, over time, it will decrease the supply until they dry out. When it dries out, nobody will know. But when it does, it will tighten and it will squeeze the spot liquidity because eventually the centralized exchanges, which holds on to all of the rest of the remaining supply, is going to be affected. So over time, there will be a push towards a higher price. We call this the hidden bid effect. But this is very slow. It takes weeks, it takes months. This is not hours, it is not seconds, it is not days. So every time BMNR buys, I make a post, I get a random stranger who comes on there and comments, oh, but why doesn't the price of ETH goes up if BMNR is buying a lot? This is exactly why. It's because they're going through the OTC desk. So really, these are some of the elements that affect the price of ETH. So with the OTC desk, there's really no way to know when they're going to run out. They're not going to tell you. But what we can infer from the centralized exchanges, the SEXs, is looking at their supply and when it runs low. So this is one thing that we can check out. And if you look at this data right over here, I think that many people have seen this. If you haven't seen this over time, this is from Crypto Quant right over here. Here is Ethereum's price right over here. Starting from 2023, here's Ethereum's price. It's trading roughly at 4,000, 3,900. Here is the reserve of ETH on centralized exchanges. Notice that it's dropped throughout time, and right now, as of October of 2025, this is the lowest point it's been in the last 2-3 years. And the other common misconception and question that I get all the time is, but what about Ethereum supply? Isn't it infinite over time? Am I not going to get inflated to oblivion? Well, if you take a look at the data right over here, after the merge about 3 years ago, about 3 years and about a month ago, you can see the supply of ETH right here in the blue line. It's actually, its inflation rate is only 0.16. It's not even a percent anymore, and it's trekking towards a deflationary tokenomics over time as we continue to upgrade ETH. Now, we're not going to talk about all of the upgrades in ETH today. That's a video for another time. We can talk about it in hours. And if you look at Bitcoin right over here, Bitcoin supply over time, yes, there's a finite cap of 21 million. And remember, some of that is lost. Some of it will never be spent. So there is a finite cap at 1.3% or at a little bit over 1%. That finite cap will rise through time. It'll take about 115 years before we run out of the supply of Bitcoin. Whereas if you take a look at ETH right now, ETH being only at a 0.16, it's actually lower inflationary than Bitcoin every single year if you look at the inflation data. And finally, let's talk about ETH's performance over time. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about patient capital. So if you look at this slide, Tom put this up earlier, notice that ETH, if we compare it, because I always get people asking me, why isn't ETH doing well this month? Well, you have to zoom out. If you zoom out to 2016, when ETH started in 2015, 2016 to now, okay, September, October, you can see the return on that is massive. It's almost 49,000%. You compare that to Bitcoin over that same period of time, Nvidia, the NASDAQ, and then gold, and then the S&P 500. You can see right over here, it's produced 4x the return of Bitcoin, 7x Nvidia, 120 times the NASDAQ, 214 times gold. I had somebody come at me and say that, oh, gold hit an all-time high, but I told them to zoom out and take a look at this right over here. And against the S&P 500, it's 248, almost 250 times. So this is what I mean by patient capital. And if you break it down over the years, starting in 2017 right over here, these are just approximate prices. You can look them up yourself. You can see that over these last sort of almost 10 years, ETH has always returned a positive year. But if you were not patient with ETH, so we'll scratch off 2019, it really started at 130, stopped at 130, so there's no change. You can only see that in 2018 and 2022, those were lost years for ETH. Now imagine coming in, and buying here or buying here, and then giving up and selling out on a good asset. Whereas if you held it throughout time, notice that the CAGR, so the compound annual growth rate, is actually 110, 112% over time. This is what I mean by holding a good asset for a long period of time. And lastly, just looking at the BMNR chart, I talked about this earlier, how it entered this ascending triangle all the way from, July, August, rolling around right over here. But unfortunately, we had that whole tariff scare again, that $20 billion wipeout in one day. Invalidated this pattern. Notice if it goes this way, that depends on Bitcoin, it depends on Ethereum, it will invalidate this pattern. But what I'm hoping is that eventually it finds its way and it fights its way into here again, okay? And it just takes one good day from BTC in order for it to do it, in order to resume this pattern so that it sets it up for a major ascending triangle, which would be super bullish on BMNR. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. I hope that you learned something useful. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.